to get things started here. All right. First off, I want to welcome everyone for joining in tonight's webinar. It's called Bear Encounters. Kim Delozier is going to be the main presenter. I'm going to help out a little bit, be a little color commentator and moderator for the chat box, but this will be Kim's presentation tonight. But usually before we get started with everything, I do want to instill confidence in everyone that the instructors that we have here at Wildlife for You are pretty knowledgeable on the topics. We're teaching a lot of wildlife stuff, some really complex wildlife stuff. And it's not because we stayed in a Holiday Inn or we read something in a magazine. We've dedicated our lives to wildlife. And so I'll do a real brief intro of myself, background, and then turn it over to Kim. But again, my name's Daryl Radijak. I did receive a degree in wildlife management from Syracuse University for all intents and purposes. But I started my career as the manager of the Appalachian Bear Center, which is now the Appalachian Bear Rescue over in Townsend, Tennessee. I did that for about 5 years. My love for bears really grew there. But then I switched jobs and I took a job with the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency. I was their big game coordinator, so I was over all the bear, deer, elk in the state of Tennessee. Did that for about 7 years. Then for some reason or another, the director saw something in me and he promoted me to chief of wildlife. So I was over all the wildlife in the state of Tennessee for about another 5 years. Did a lot of stuff in the whole southeast. So it wasn't just managing bears in Townsend or Tennessee. It was regional and large scale management that I was doing. So I've been pretty much working with big game animals or larger animals for about 20 years, which doesn't hold a candle to our primary speaker, Kim Delozier, and I'll turn it over to Kim to introduce himself and give a little background about where Kim comes from.
Okay. Well, thank you, Daryl. I really appreciate that too. Yeah, Daryl and I have been working together for many, many years. Now, I'd like to show this picture too, Daryl. I appreciate you doing that because I'm quite a bit younger there than what I am today, so I kind of like those pictures as well too. But anyway, that's one of my favorite pictures. The feet on those little cubs are just unbelievable too. But a lot of people think that they're harmless too, but those little cubs are like little buzzsaws. They're like a little chainsaw that's going crazy. But anyway, I worked at Great Smoky Mountains National Park for 32 years. I was raised on a farm. I'm a pretty simple country guy, raised on a farm with cattle, and we had 13,000 chickens for eggs and pigs, and just a general farm. So I grew up on a farm and started at University of Tennessee in 1973. Graduated in Wildlife and Fisheries Science. And I plan to go back and go on and continue my education and acquire my master's degree, but there was a permanent job staring me in the face at the park, and so I elected to go ahead and take the permanent job, which is the right decision for me. And I worked there then for better than 32 years as well. First started working, on hog control as a wild boar control person, working in the backcountry. Pigs are nocturnal, so we did most of our work late evening and at nighttime. And then started working on bears, nuisance bears. We've done a lot of work, of course, with nuisance bears in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. We're definitely not any smarter than anybody else, any of the bear managers in the country. I think what's different for us is we just have the opportunity to be able to experience and see and encounter so many different nuisance bears. Having last year 11 million visitors to Great Smoky Mountains National Park and having a bear population of 15 or 1,600 too, you can see pretty easily that the chances of an encounter is fairly high. So we have a lot of people, we have a lot of bears in the park too, and so we had the opportunity to learn, and we didn't have a book that told us how we should manage bears, how we should capture bears, sows with cubs. We did not have books that told us basically if we should move a bear or if we should ignore the situation or if we should euthanize a bear. So we kind of had to feel our way through those early years and try to figure out what was the best thing too. But one thing I learned over many years is that people are concerned about bears. They love bears, and they want us to have that same concern, which we did, to be able to make sure we do the best job we can to manage that population and to manage individual bears. if any of you have a degree in wildlife and fisheries science, typically when you went through school, we were taught to manage populations. And I said in an article the other day that, that's really true. We do manage populations, but the general public of who we work for, they want us to make sure that we do focus and we also give attention to individual animals. And that's obviously where Appalachian Bear Rescue comes into play too. So, sometimes we do have to euthanize bears, and it's a very unfortunate, it's a very, very uncomfortable thing to be able to do that. But occasionally that does happen too. You know what? I always throw the question back to someone else. You tell me what we should do before we have to put an animal down. So it's a big deal if we put an animal down in Great Smoky Mountains National Park, and it should be too. So I also work as a advisor for ABR as well. For the last 3 years, I've taught classes for Safe Capture International on large animal capture, animal welfare. So I've done that as well too. But I made a full circle. I'm back on the farm now, taking care of my dad's cattle for him too. He's got dementia, so I'm caring for my dad. So that takes quite a bit of time as well too. But I feel like I'm in the prime of my life right now too, and doing things like this right here to be able to share my experiences with you all. And I want to make sure you all understand this webinar is for you. I don't want to go on the tangent and waste time telling things that's not important to you too. So if you do have questions, please let us know what those are, and I'll focus on that as well and try to answer those the best I can. I don't have all the answers. I told people that once before when we were bringing elk in. They kept asking me, all these farmers said, what are you going to do if this happens? Or what are you going to do if that happens? I said, look, I don't have all the answers, but one thing I will tell you, I will be here for the duration of this experimental release of elk too. And I said, if I knew all the answers, I probably wouldn't be working for the federal government. So anyway, I've had a great career. I've been very, very blessed in what I've been able to do. We have learned a lot in Great Smoky Mountains National Park about bears. For example, I remember in 1980, I believe it was 1989, we handled, and I had one lady helping me that summer, but we handled 98 different bears that one year. So it was an unbelievable year too. So we've got our hands on a lot of bears. We've got to see how bears respond to different things that we did as far as management is concerned to try to save those animals and reverse that behavior. We're going to be having another webinar coming up. I think it's in March, I think, Daryl. Yes. And it's on bear management. And I think that's very important because people will know, well, why did you do this? And so we have to make sure that you all understand what goes on in our head when we make a decision if we should move a bear or do nothing or euthanize a bear. So it's not an absolute science. We sometimes make mistakes, but we do our best that we can with the animals obviously concerned at the top as well too. So anyway, bears have we've learned a lot, and we've been very, very, very fortunate. In the early years in Great Smoky Mountains National Park, probably there was not near as many bears as what we have now. Back in the 70s, when I started at the park in 79, we probably had 200 to 400 bears in 500,000 acres. So that's not a very, very high density. Today, the last estimate from the University of Tennessee, the estimate was between 1,500 and 1,600, which is about a bear per square mile. And so that's a much, much higher density than what we had back in the earlier years. What's changed too, we've had our density of people has definitely increased as well too. And people is not necessarily a problem, but they bring in a lot of garbage too. We know garbage is really the one thing that really, really hurts as far as keeping these bears wild if we do that. So most of our time, I would tell people, is really spent on talking trash. And it's not very glamorous or glorious to work on garbage and try to keep trash from getting to bears, but it's very, very effective as well too. We've done everything you can think of with garbage cans. And I remember one time we actually electrified a dumpster too. I put this dumpster on some old rubber tires, and then I electrified that, hopefully thinking that bear would touch it, it would get a shock from it, and it wouldn't turn the dumpster over. So we had one bear in Chimney's picnic area that had 3 legs. We have no idea what happened to his other leg, but he did obviously very, very good because he could balance on that 1 foot and actually started to roll that, push that dumpster, and actually turn dumpsters over to get garbage out of it. You know what? And it worked on that dumpster. He didn't. He must have touched the dumpster and didn't turn it over, but he went right down the road and went to the next dumpster and turned it over as well too. So we've made a lot of mistakes, but hopefully we've learned from that too. We've helped other bear managers in North America to hopefully refine some of their techniques they did. One of the techniques I'll tell you real quick is that we use in the Smokies. It's been different than other bear managers. Is that we use a technique called capture and release on site. And it's pretty simple. What it is we really try to keep a bear out of a developed area during the daytime when people are there too. Is you have to make the negative experience greater than the positive experience. I don't mean necessarily hurting the bear too, but we would, if a bear was not active in a picnic area, we would catch it in a trap. We would ear tag it, tattoo it, put it to sleep, pull a non-functional tooth, which is the first premolar right behind the canine, and then we would take a blood sample, maybe take a hair sample, and take it back up to the same area and release it. And that was a negative experience. I tell people it's kind of like, how many people love to go to the dentist? Well, I went today, but it's not a very pleasant experience. But is it good for you? Absolutely, it's good for you. So that's kind of what capture and release on site was. It's something that doesn't necessarily hurt the bear. It's very uncomfortable, but it's a negative experience they remember associated with that particular site. So we're going to talk about that in detail on the next webinar on bear management too. But I want to go over first on some things about we're going to try to cover, and I've got a few things down here about what do bears think, or how do they think, how do they communicate. Questions, why do they follow us on a trail? And that's one of my biggest concerns, bears that follow people as well. Well, is it dangerous to hike in bear country? And we're going to talk about some of those things. We're going to talk about bear behavior. We're going to talk really about bear encounters, the different scenarios of maybe what I would do in that situation if you encounter a bear and it does A, B, or C. So we're going to talk about that as well. Sometimes I'll tell you bears are kind of like people. Sometimes I don't think they know where they're going or what they're doing. I think they're just out cruising, exploring, doing different things kind of like people do as well. And they're opportunistic, I think, on food. So if they could find something that's easy to get, then they're going to take advantage of that as well. But sometimes I think they change their minds like people do. Some of the key bear behaviors that we're going to talk about is, of course, a wild behavior, which is the best behavior that we would hope we could obtain. Habituated, food conditioned, offensive, and defensive. And I'm going to throw one more in called tolerance. And so we'll talk about some of those as well. You just think about what bears need or what they want to. They obviously need to eat like we do. They need to sleep like we do. They reproduce and they protect their territory or protect necessarily their cubs or their feeding areas too. So that's kind of what bears do. Some bears don't, like some people, they're hard to get along with, and they want to be by themselves too, and they can be, bears can have bad bear days, kind of like we may have bad hair days. They have bad bear days, and so sometimes they have a short fuse. Doesn't take much for them to set them off as well. Other bears have a personality where they hear something, they hear a person talk, or they smell someone, they take off, and they want nothing to do with that. You have to really look at back. Like I said, I think very simple when you're talking about bears, dealing with bears and bear encounters. But basically, mother bears, if they do the right thing, they train their cubs to be afraid of people or the smell of people. So whenever they smell people or see people, then the mother will run away and train their cubs to do that. Now, do they always follow what mama says? And the answer is no, they do not. I tell people it's a yearling bear. Once they're weaned from their mother, to me it's kind of like if you had children and you took your kid to college and dropped them off and said, "Hey, I'll pick you up here at the end of the year." Do they always make the right decisions? Of course, the answer is no, they don't make the right decisions as well. So hopefully you've had a good influence on them and that they will eventually make the right decision in most of the things they deal with too. And bears are kind of the same way. They always don't necessarily do what we think they're going to do. But in many cases, in generalities, we can kind of predict what they're doing, what they're saying by the way they're acting as well. So first, we're going to talk about the wild behavior. Wild behavior basically is a behavior that whenever it smells us, sees us, hears something too, it runs from us. It wants to be able to get away, have a safe distance away from us to be able to protect itself and survive. And we obviously want that as well too. The other is habituated. Habituated behavior is you'll see that a lot in national parks that do not allow hunting, where these animals will feed naturally near, I call people areas, roads, trails, housing areas. They will feed naturally near people areas, but their intent is not necessarily to get food from people. They're able to take advantage of natural foods that's close to people areas or developed areas, and hopefully that'll continue and they will not necessarily get human food. The next couple is offensive and defensive behavior. And when we talk about offensive too, we talk really about predatory behavior as part of that as well. Offensive could be basically a behavior where it's coming toward you with a purpose. And its purpose necessarily is to either harm you in some way or necessarily try to take something away from you that belongs to you and it wants it. Defensive behavior is really pretty simple. It's to defend its space or defend its kill or defend its food source or defend its cubs. So defensive behavior is where most of the people will encounter, and hopefully we don't have too many have to deal with offensive behavior. Tolerance is one I'll talk about real quickly here. Tolerance is basically where an animal will tolerate your presence to be able to take advantage of something that's beneficial to it. For example, if there's white oak acorns, which is the main food for bears in the fall of the year here in the eastern U.S., and those bears may not let other bears or people get very close to them, but when you have a high quality food source there, they will take advantage of that food source and they will allow other bears and they will allow people to get relatively close to them, basically ignoring them. Not that they're not disturbed. If you could put a heart monitor on that animal, my guess is, and a blood pressure, I bet you if you check those two probably would elevate. But however, they look like they're not stressed out. They're not necessarily stressed in any way, but they probably are, just because they're tolerating your presence to be able to take advantage of a high quality food source, because they know they're going to be going down to sleep fairly soon. They've got to get as much energy in them as they can, gain as much weight as they possibly can to be able to do that. Okay, let's back up under the food condition. Food condition behavior is what a lot of times we deal with in the park, of course, with so many people. Food condition is where these animals will approach people or they'll approach a developed area with the intent of trying to get food or garbage from us. That's pretty self-explanatory. So whenever you look at a bear approaching you, you don't know what that bear's thinking unless you've had some history with it before. So if it approaches you, who knows if it's necessarily a food condition behavior, if it's habituated behavior, and so sometimes it's kind of hard to differentiate between those two. Some of the bear encounters that we've had in the park have elevated to a level that we definitely don't like to see. Has anyone ever been killed in Great Smoky Mountains National Park? And the answer to that is yes. We've had one lady, Glenda Bradley, who was a local school teacher, that was killed May 21st, year 2000. And I was actually at park headquarters working on the environmental assessment for reintroduction of elk whenever I first heard the call. So Glenda was a person that basically, I don't think Glenda did anything wrong at all. She was actually hiking with her ex-husband, and he was fishing, and she was actually walking up the trail and was actually sitting in a tree reading a book whenever she encountered this bear. And the bear basically, we're not, of course, we wasn't there. We're not sure what actually happened to, but we feel like this bear went after her. It was a predatory attack, and the bear was actually looking at her as a source of food. Does that happen very often? Absolutely not. It does not happen very often, and we're very thankful of that. Uh, but Glenda, not sure Glenda did anything wrong at all. Glenda was not a very big person, and that's obviously one thing that is part of a predatory behavior for a bear. Other situation, we had another lady, I'm sorry, another little girl, Elora Petrusek, that was actually killed by a bear down on the Cherokee National Forest, kind of northeast of Chattanooga, Tennessee. We had another little boy, Dennis Martin, back in 1969, that went missing on the Appalachian Trail. Never heard from him. People kind of speculated maybe bears were involved with that. We're not really for sure. We had another one, Evan Paula, in Rainbow Falls parking area. Evan was attacked by a bear, and his dad actually fought the bear off. We'll talk a little bit more about that just in a few minutes, too. We've had other cases, too, and we've had a lot of experience with bears that chase people. You know, why does a certain bear chase someone and other bears would run from people? We had one particular area that was a gravel road in the park in Tremont, and we had a jogger on that road that jogged there every single day. One day he was jogging, a bear came out and chased him down the road. He turned to fight the bear too, and actually got the bear to stop its aggression. He turned and continued to run, and the bear took off after him again. That continued for several times until another vehicle came around the curve, and the gentleman was able to jump on the front hood of the vehicle and able actually to escape away from the bear. So we've had those kind of things too. We had another elderly couple in the park on a Sunday afternoon that a bear came out and came after them. The husband actually was kicking the bear, fighting the bear off, and was doing everything he can to keep the bear away from his wife. Finally got to the point where they threw their backpack down, and the bear went over to the backpack thinking it was going to be getting food. So they turned and went on around the trail, and then just in a second after that, the bear came up after them. So the bear was not after their food. So that's a pretty concerning behavior. They were able to fight the bear off, and we actually caught the bear the next day in that area. Typically what we do, we'll go into the same area where a bad encounter happens like this, and we'll actually start, having some kind of food source. Typically we'll fry bacon, and I know fried bacon smells really good. It draws me in every time, but it actually pulled the bear in very, very fast. And so we're able to make contact with that particular animal too. So that's just real quickly, just some of the major negative encounters that escalated to attacks in the park as well. We'll talk a little bit more about those. Daryl, have we got any questions, any pressing questions right now we want to address?
Yeah, Betsy Parson just typed a question. Kim, if you want to take a second to read that and develop a response for Betsy, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go through a couple of slides that kind of summarize all the different scenarios you could encounter. So I'll let you catch your wind, take a drink of water, and take a look at Betsy's question. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to take over just for a minute or two and just show the folks some of the slides here. And so one of the main points that we want to get across in this is that if you do have an encounter with a bear, in almost every situation that you encounter this animal, that animal really does not want anything to do with you. These are usually defensive situations, and I'll explain some of the different scenarios you can find yourself in. But whenever you do encounter a bear, oftentimes what you'll find is they try talking to you. They have vocalizations, they have body posturing, they'll do certain behaviors that will tell you exactly what kind of mood they're in. And oftentimes it's real easy to tell you, it's real easy for you to see that they're just as distressed, if not more distressed than you are. And Kim can go over those in a second, but just to give you an idea of what some of these encounters may be, say you're hiking in the Smokies, say you're taking your garbage out to the curb and you live in bear country, you just never know when you could have a close encounter with a bear. And so these are some of the situations you might find yourself in. And so first off, you could surprise a bear at close range. If you're on a trail where the vegetation is really, really dense, you could turn the corner and bam, you have a bear standing 10 feet in front of you. That's going to cause a reaction from him. It's going to cause a reaction from you. But these surprise encounters are a situation you might have to deal with. Another one is if you're around a food source. Now, it doesn't have to be a fresh kill. Like in the picture, you see the bear feeding on a carcass. That can definitely happen. But just think about being in the Smokies. You could be hiking on a trail and it could be midsummer and you're in a blackberry field. That is a huge food source for bears. And so bears are going to be drawn to that as a food source. If you're in town, you could be, I hate to say it, but unfortunately everyone knows that bears are sometimes drawn to garbage. And so they consider that their food source. You could have a bear encounter around their food source. Another situation you could find, and this is, you see this all the time in Cades Cove, it's a beautiful area to visit. You can see bears walking all over the place, but oftentimes in the late spring, early summer, you have a mother with cubs, and that could lead to a difficult situation if you get too close to that mom with her cubs. Another one, moving earlier summer, you have mating season. So if bears are pretty much solitary animals, other than a mother with cubs, adult bears don't hang out together. Now, if you're in the midsummer and you see a couple of adult bears hanging out together, that could be mating season, and you could get bears being defensive or territorial with their mate. And then last but not least, this is a big one here, is oftentimes, especially with not so much national parks, because a lot of national parks don't allow dogs off leash, but if you're on a national forest, the U.S. Forest Service has tons and tons of public land that you could go hiking with your dogs. And if you encounter a bear with your dog, that could lead to a really difficult situation with that bear, and we want you to know how to react. Now, you see in this picture here, this bear is actually being chased by the dog. That kind of dog there is what we call a Karelian Bear Dog. They're specifically designed and trained to chase bears, and they do a wonderful job. Lots of dogs will chase bears, but oftentimes when you get on that national park or national forest, people like going camping with their little Fifi dog, and that dog has a heart of gold. It's going to defend its master. It might chase a bear, but oftentimes that bear is only going to run about 3 or 4 steps, realize what's chasing him, turn around and go after the dog. And where does that dog typically go? It oftentimes goes back to its human. And so these situations, everything I described right here, whether or not you surprise it at close range or on a kill or mother with cubs, mating season, or even like if there's a dog involved, in almost every situation, this bear is acting defensively. It is nervous. It does not want you around. And so there's different behaviors that the bear will do. There's probably different behaviors that you should do. But this literally makes up almost every encounter you have with a bear. It's not all of them, but the vast majority of encounters you have, it's going to be in this defensive type of situation. Now, can a bear act offensively? Hopefully it'll go there. And unfortunately, yes, they can act offensively, and Kim touched base with this. Sometimes they're food conditioned. They're looking for that food reward. They smell something on you in your pack or in a campsite they're constantly rewarded at. So these bears are coming toward you looking for this food reward. And the worst situation of all, fortunately, it's also the least common, is whenever a bear gets into this seeking you type of mode. Again, this does not happen all too often, but this is what we truly call a true predatory mode. And so those are some of the offensive type of behaviors that a bear may exhibit when it's seeking that food reward. Excuse me. Whether or not it's something that they smell on you or they're interested in you. Fortunately, like I said, that does not happen all too often. Now, I will tell you, I am going to go to the next slide, Kim. One of the things that you have to understand in these two different situations, it's really important for you to recognize what kind of situation you're in. And so the good thing to understand when you're in this defensive mode, or the bear, I should say, the bear is in this defensive mode, pretty much what that bear wants to do is increase the distance between you and him. He wants to get away, or he wants you to get away from him. That whenever you see the bear, like whether or not he's huffing at you or popping his jaws, and we could talk about that, but they want to increase that distance between you and him. Now, on the offensive side of things, oops, I went the wrong way. On the offensive side of things, remember, that's when they're kind of seeking this food reward. They want to decrease. They're getting closer to you to see if there's a reward there for them. And usually that's typically a food reward. And so it's really easy to differentiate between the bear being in a defensive mode or an offensive mode by the way he's acting and if he wants to get closer or further away from you. So, Kim, I'll turn it back over to you if you want to answer Betsy's question first, and then you could take it wherever you want to go from here.
Yeah. Betsy, let me do say that. And I've had that same question posed to me several times, especially after Glenda Bradley was killed in 2000. People who had always hiked in the Smokies had never worried about bears. I think most people felt at that time that a black bear would never have predatory behavior. It would never go after a person as a source of food. And we hadn't experienced that before, and so we thought maybe we were immune from that. And I think part of the reason why that's probably been the case for so many years is that I think the farther north that you go, I think the fewer numbers of prey species you have, and so I think you increase the likelihood that people may be a little bit higher on the priority list as far as a potential food source for certain bears at certain times of the year under certain conditions. But I think the farther south you go, there's more food. There's more bears that have had encounters with people, so the chances of a predatory behavior is not quite as likely too. Now, can you always say for sure it's always safe? No, you can't really. Betsy, it's there's probably a better chance, a higher chance that someone would get hurt or killed driving their vehicle to the trailhead as opposed to being attacked by a black bear and being hurt or killed by a black bear, or even stung by an insect or have some kind of anaphylactic shot with an insect sting or things like that too. So those are probably even a higher priority than a bear. But you can never say 100% too. I always tell people if you want to kind of even the score, I basically would carry bear spray. I think bear spray is very effective. There's been research on it as well too. Will it always work? You can't ever say. There's no absolutes here, but in most situations, even for a small person, and we'll talk about small people versus big people here in a second, that the bear spray, it can be something that people can carry to give them a little more confidence that they can necessarily have something to be able to fight a bear if they happen to do that. Let me say one thing about bear spray though. Obviously, you have to make sure you understand how to use it. Be concerned about the wind. Make sure you don't use it too far away from the animal. If the animal is a concern, it's going to be within 5 feet of your feet or knees, and so you're going to have a good chance to be able to get that spray into its eyes. A lot of people think that, oh, well, this is the cure-all. All I have to do is take bear spray and spray it around my campsite or on my tent or on my sleeping bags, and I'm good. Well, it's organic, so basically, if you do that, bear spray can serve as an attractant more than a repellent or a deterrent. So you can't spray it on the ground. You can't spray it on your tent and think it's going to keep bears away from you. It may do just the opposite. Okay, here we go.
Kim, before you go on, Lisa asked a question about your thoughts on the bear that consumed the man a few months ago in the park. Okay.
Yeah, we've talked about that as well too, and I think the gentleman there was two guys that were actually in the park illegally digging ginseng, and they actually found one guy that was dead, and there was a bear that was actually feeding on his body, and so they did this an autopsy. They got the results from that. It come to find out the guy died before the bear actually started to feed on his body as well too, which I've always wanted to think that was the case, that I felt like that this bears a lot of times would wait until that person died before he did that. So I was pretty happy about that. That the gentleman was already dead before that bear started to feed on him. Bears are very, very intelligent. If they think someone's going to put up a fight against them too, they may wait or try somebody else as well too. They're not necessarily going to go after someone who's going to put up a big fight like that as well. But this guy, he died of methamphetamine intoxication, and of course, yeah, that was a big stink about the Park Service put the bear down. Should they put it down? Should they not put it down? And I tell you what, it's a balancing act on what's the right thing to do. I personally felt like that bear needed to be put down. A bear that actually consumes human flesh. Does it happen again? I can't say it does. Steve Herrero says that if bears attack a person, that they will tend to, generally speaking, they will tend to repeat that behavior. So, but in a case like this, I don't think there's many situations that we can pull historically of whether that would happen or not. But you know what? The safest thing for the people, and of course, human safety is number one. Not that we're going to go around killing bears that look at us the wrong way, but we have to be very, very careful to make sure that bear doesn't do that. You know what? I've got a son, a daughter, and 4 grandsons too. And if a bear manager released a bear that I thought was dangerous or turned out to be dangerous, it did harm or actually kill one of my grandsons, I would be pretty upset as well too. So I think it's a balancing act to be able to make sure we make the right decision, but to be able to make sure that we are targeting the right animal with a behavior that we do not want to be passed on. And some people say, what's the big deal? If a mother, trains her cubs to eat some garbage, that's, what's the big deal about that? Well, you know what? It's maybe not be a big deal if it just trains her cub, but what happens when those cubs grow up and they train their cub to do the same thing, to rely on garbage too, to be food conditioned as well, and then pretty soon the next generation does the same thing. What you're doing, you're actually compromising the whole integrity of the bear population. So in the cases of Yosemite, I worked with bear managers out there many years ago too, and most of their bears they had there in the valley were food conditioned animals as well too. And the only way they would ever going to change that basically was they were going to have to eliminate a large number of animals and start with a fresh batch of bears with wild behavior. And of course, we know that that was a public outcry not to necessarily go that route. So anyway, but let me go back to defense and offense. Let me tell you one thing what that is. So if you encounter a bear and it has this defensive behavior, what does that mean? Or what does a bear do to tell you that it's a defensive behavior, that you're too close to it? It's going to do things like pop its jaws. It's going to shake vegetation. It will actually swat the ground. It'll actually take its paws and swat the ground. Skunks will do that sometimes before they spray. But bears will do that too. They will moan, and they will bluff charge too. So all these, it's trying to intimidate you, and most all the time it works. They'll bluff charge you. They'll pop their jaws. They'll blow. They'll shake vegetation too, and jump on the side of a tree. So what they're trying to do, they're trying to be big and bad, and trying to get you to increase your distance and move you away. And most people, definitely will do that pretty quickly as well. People should slowly back up, basically give that animal some room. So all they're trying to do is just get you. And people are the same way. I mean, you have some people that talk to you will get right in your face. They'll get right in your space, and some people just can't handle that, and so you back up. And so bears are kind of the same way. Offensive behavior, typically they don't vocalize. They don't jump on the side of a tree. They don't huff and puff. They don't blow. They don't swat the ground. They don't do any of that stuff as in a defensive behavior. They typically will follow you. Sometimes they'll lower their head down low. Sometimes their ears will actually retract back, kind of move back, and they'll just kind of look at you and stare at you. So they're not necessarily trying to defend their territory at all. They're actually approaching you with some motive in mind of why they want to get closer. Now, what happens, I thought about this before. Let's say you're at a campsite and a bear goes around you in circles and keeps on circling your campsite too. Well, sometimes I think that that bears are after our food. And other times, I think if you're on a trail and a bear goes around you, I think sometimes bears are evaluating how you're going to respond. If you're very timid and you tend to, you're scared, and they can read very quickly that you're afraid and you're scared. You take off running, it may cause an animal to chase after you as well, which is definitely not something you want to do. Happens with dogs. Sometimes you confront a dog and he will bark and bark and bark, and you stand your ground with him too. But other cases, if you turn and run, it'll prop that chase response, and you're off on the races with that as well. So bears are kind of real similar with that. So that's kind of the difference between offense and defensive behavior. It's very important to understand those two things and know how to deal with offensive and defensive behavior. Daryl, we got any other questions?
Let's take a little break here. If anyone has any questions, go ahead and type them in. I know a few of you have asked. Kim, if you want to look, Scott Watson just typed you a long one. While you read that, one of the things that you reminded me of, and I wanted to let people know, I was asked to testify about in front of the New Mexico legislature about whether or not if a bear goes after someone, do they then develop? Because a lot of people say, oh, it develops a taste for blood type of thing, and it's not like that. However, one thing that I was going to testify on as a bear behavior specialist, if I was asked the question, would a bear do it again? If it did it once, would it do it again? And the best way that I could relate this to folks is developing an analogy. And what I was prepared to tell everyone is, think about anyone that wants to go skydiving. The very first time they go skydiving, they're probably up in that plane, that door opens, and they are terrified. They don't want to do it, but eventually they jump out there, the chute opens, they land safely. And so I equate that to the bear behavior. So a bear, the first time it goes after someone, it is probably terrified, and it does not want to do it. But if there's no negative consequences and he gets a food reward, he's not, just like the plane or the skydiver, the second and third and fourth time they go skydiving, it's probably not as difficult for them to jump out that plane. And so that bear, if you think of it in that situation, if a bear does it once and gets rewarded, then it's not as afraid the next time. And it may be, it's not like it's seeking that, but it's definitely not afraid, since there's no negative consequences that first time. So that was one thing that Kim reminded me when he was talking. So anyway, now's a good time to ask some questions. If you want to respond to Scott first, and then I'll see what other questions are in the queue.
Yeah, thank you, Scott, for that question too. That's interesting too. That's brings back memories from back in the '70s and stuff. But yeah, I'll be happy to do that. For everybody else, let me say one thing about this. We're going to pull all this together here in a few minutes on bear encounters. Of what do you do if you encounter a bear? So we're going to start basically with an encounter, and we're going to go through different behaviors of what you do in response to what the bear's doing, and tell you how you change your response to a certain type of behavior too. So we're going to pull all that together so that you know what's the best thing to do in a certain situation too. But Scott, let me say one thing about that. We moved a deer out of Cades Cove. Tennessee was involved. Tennessee Wildlife Resource Agency was involved in a deer restoration project back in the '70s, and we actually captured 275 deer out of Cades Cove. Most all those were females, and donated those animals to the state so they could restore deer in eastern Tennessee. I guess most people don't realize that, back in those times, deer were not plentiful. They were not everywhere like they are today. So yeah, those deers were used for deer restoration in Tennessee. And you're correct. Back in the '70s, there was a study by Bob or Robert Downing from Clemson University trying to determine whether we had a presence of a mountain lion in the Southern Appalachians and in the Southeast. And so, of course, a lot of people had seen mountain lions. So we have them. Supposedly, people had them in their freezers and things like that too. So Bob actually spent 5 or 6 years of his life basically running every lead down he possibly could. And in doing so, he explained to us basically what the difference is, how bears will, if they kill or find a dead deer or hog or another animal, how they will cache that carcass so they can come back and feed later. Also, versus how a cat will cache a carcass to be able to feed later too. And this is the big difference. Bears are not quite as selective. They don't necessarily, they'll just drag it somewhere in seclusion. They'll cover it up. Maybe if they're going to try to come back, they'll cover it up with logs and dirt and leaves and all kind of debris. Everything just piles stuff on top of it. Cats are a little cleaner. Cats, sometimes they will detach the intestines and the stomach. They'll detach that and pull it away from the carcass to preserve that carcass for a longer period of time, which makes makes common sense. So it gets down to the point. We found some of those in the 70s in Cades Cove, and Bob said, it's this looks like a cat kill at that time, and he said, let me explain to you how we tell the difference between different type of cats. He said, typically the cat will basically will detach the innards. They'll pull it away from it to preserve the carcass a longer period of time. Then they will put their paw on the center of their rib cage, and they'll make a circular motion around that carcass, and they'll only pull leaves on top of it, or the top leaf litter on top of it. They will not pull dirt and things like that. That'll contaminate the carcass even more. So they just pull the leaf litter, so they're much cleaner about trying to preserve that carcass to come back to it later and feed. And he said they'll make a circle around that, and you'll see where they will rotate around that carcass. They'll pull that leaf litter and things on top of it to cover it up so people can't necessarily, or other animals can't see it. And he said the only difference is between a mountain lion kill or a cache and a bobcat is just the length of the reach. A bobcat cannot reach near as long as a mountain lion can. So really, you can have a better idea of whether that animal was cached by a bobcat or it was cached by a mountain lion just by the length of the reach from where the paw would be on the rib cage and how far it could reach out and pull that debris or leaf litter on top of it to preserve it too. So that was news to me. I didn't know that, but obviously that we saw a few of those in Cades Cove at that time. Do we have mountain lions in the Smokies? I've been asked that numerous times too. I can tell you this, that we do not have any proof of mountain lions in the Smokies or in other areas around the Smokies. Of course, we do in West Tennessee. Some cats have moved in the western part of the state, so we do have a couple of sightings and confirmations there too. But around the Smokies too, we never did. I think we had some very, very reliable sightings. And my response to that was this, that when I was growing up here in eastern Tennessee, I remember there was not any regulations on captive animals. And so just a short distance down from where I live, a guy had mountain lions, and he actually sold the kittens through the newspaper in Knoxville. So I remember there was cougar kittens for sale for $900 through the Knoxville News Sentinel that people could call this guy and buy the cats too. So that's all changed as well now. So people still have cats here, and I asked the vets, the teachers or the professors at the University of Tennessee that treated some of these animals. My question was, do you think these are the kind of people that might release some cats in Great Smoky Mountains National Park or in the surrounding area? And they said, yeah, there's probably a good chance of that as well. Some people believe maybe that, it's kind of like Free Willy. They think they can release it in the park and it's going to live happily ever after, and that's not necessarily true. All those immune survival techniques that it has. We've had cats killed in Western Tennessee years ago that had been defanged or declawed. We had some that were killed, I think, in South Carolina that had their stomach was full of cat food, things like that too. So we had a guy, an expert from the Florida Panther Project, came to the Smokies and spent some time here, and he said, I do not think you have one resident pair of mountain lions here. And I said, why do you say that, or how can you be confident? He said, look, it's not like they're very secretive. If you had one resident pair in the Smokies, he said they would make a tremendous amount of sign. They would walk trails. They would defecate at trail junctions. They would make visible kills. They would cache those kills. You would know for sure if you had one resident pair. So my feel is, I don't think we have a resident population of mountain lions in or around the Smokies at all. So what's the explanation for all these people who are very credible biology teachers that see those? And my speculation is it's that it's these captive cats that people have released, thinking they're going to, they're doing the right thing, trying to release them in the Smokies, and they don't have the skills to be able to survive, and they end up basically living a short life and dying, and we never see them again. So that's kind of my, I guess, my theory on where these sightings actually come from. But to this day, we have no, at least in and around the Smokies, no proof, no videos, no casts of tracks, no still shots of any cougars in the Smokies. Will that change? It could change, but up until now, we just haven't confirmed that at all. So, if I hope it answers your question, is kind of what I was referring to in that back in the 70s.
We'll get back to bears. Donna asked a question about, she runs a lodge in Rugby where folks do a lot of hiking around the Big South Fork. Is there a book, pamphlet, something I could give them on the subject? Donna, do me one favor. As soon as we're done here, send me a reminder. I'll try to remember, but send me an email. I can send you a whole stack of brochures about living in bear country and what to do in bear country. I've got a bunch of those I can give out. However, I will tell you this, when it comes to what you should do in a bear encounter, and sometimes I have debates with the State Wildlife Agency because oftentimes they put in a brochure and they've only got like this much room within the brochure to explain what you should do. And you can't do that. Kim already mentioned, every encounter is different. And by you listening to Kim or myself, whenever we give these presentations, we can explain some of the different scenarios and what may be a good way to react to them. But oftentimes, like the state agency will say, no matter what, fight back. That's a good piece of advice in almost every situation. Every once in a while, though, I'll give you a prime example. Here in New Mexico, we had a woman who was participating in a half marathon on the national forest, and she ran up over the hill and she surprised a mother with cubs, and the mother was engaged her really quickly, and the more that woman fought back, the more the bear fought back. It wasn't until she stopped fighting and laid there quiet. The mother bear just wanted to end the threat that it perceived to her cubs. And so as soon as the woman stopped fighting back, the mother bear got off of her and grabbed the cub and moved away. And so these brochures are really, really good just to give you a good idea of what you should do in most situations. But you can't begin to understand every situation unless you learn and ask questions that you have the opportunity to ask us today. But make sure you send me an email and ask for those brochures, because I could send you a whole stack of them if you want. All right.
Daryl, also there's one. Let's get this thing right here. There's folios that are given out in Great Smoky Mountains National Park at the Visitor Center, and it's like a probably a 3 or 4 page thing of how you deal with bears in campgrounds, how you deal with bears on trails, how you deal with bears with residential areas. So they have some really good information that they can share with you as well too. Also, TWRA, like Daryl said, TWRA has some great information as well to provide. So yeah, there's a lot of information out there. The Center for Wildlife Information is another place that you can look up, and they provide a lot of literature on bears. Daryl, have we got anything else here?
They're a little. There's a couple one. Bob asked about the recent study with the GPS collars around the bears in the Smokies, and for those that don't know, that they just kind of published some of the results of that. And literally what they're finding out is that the bears can travel great distances, and very rarely do you have a bear that lives its entire life inside Great Smoky Mountain National Park. They get outside the boundaries looking for food and travel all over the place. And so literally what that is telling us is that these bears are likely to encounter people. Almost every bear is likely to encounter people throughout its lifetime, especially on the East Coast. Now, the western half of the U.S., when you get into the Rockies and some of those areas, those bears may not encounter people that much. But with as many people living in the East Coast as there are, and the bear populations that are growing more and more in almost every eastern states, that study tells us that those bears wander quite a bit and they get within human developed areas, and so they have quite a bit of encounters with humans. I think it's really interesting study, because for a long time we thought, well, maybe some bears just don't engage people whatsoever, but it appears from that study that they travel quite a bit, and throughout their travels they're going to encounter people quite a bit. All right, go ahead,
Yeah.
Kim.
What I started to say too, you're right. And farther north, up in Algonquin Park too, a lot of the feeling from the bear managers there is a lot of times they have predatory attacks up there, and a lot of times I think they feel like that maybe bears have had very little association with people at all too, and so that's happened up there. But one thing before we get too far, I want to make sure that we do cover some signs of predatory behavior, which is a offensive type of behavior. So here's some things I'm going to list for you that are predatory in nature that you need to be concerned about. So if you have an animal that is exhibiting predatory behavior toward you, typically we've had very little or no history of that bear. So normally garbage bears, not always, but generally speaking, garbage bears are not typically your bears that show predatory behavior. Generally speaking, uh, in most cases it's a young male. Typically, there are no vocalizations. We talked about that before. These animals are offensive. They're trying to get close to you, and there's persistence in the attack. They're playing for keeps here. So if they come after you, they're not going to like bite you on the leg one time and run off too. They're going to stick with you the whole time. So persistence in the attack. In the case with Evan Paula up at Rainbow Falls Trailhead too. Uh, Evan's brother and dad was behind him, and Evan was climbing out of the creek, little branch going up to the trail. And the bear actually, his brother turned around and looked, and the bear had come up behind Evan. I think he put his paws on his shoulders and was pushing Evan down. And he said, I saw as he pushed Evan down, the bear's mouth was open right above his neck. So he was going for his neck, trying to basically, going to grab him and shake him and break his neck. So his dad went on the offensive, went over and started yelling, screaming, kicking the bear too, and was able to get the bear off of Evan's back. He told Evan to run. Evan took off running towards the trail. The bear took off one way. They made a big circle and bow. The bear hit him the second time. So there's persistence in the attack. They basically are not going to give up real easily too. This is something else I want you to remember. Typically, they go after the smallest or the weakest person. So think about that too. If you're a predator, you're going to go after something gives you the least resistance, and typically that may be a smaller person. Now, I know some small people that are not that are like a fireball, and they're not going to give up at all. But typically, they're going to go after the weakest or the smallest person in a group of people. So how can you use that? Think about that. How many times people have been walking down the trail and their kids or grandkids want to run ahead on the trail to be able to get out and hide behind a tree and scare people as they go by. So obviously be cautious about that too, that bears typically will go after the smallest person. That happened with Elora Petrosek down in Cherokee National Forest. And it was the mother, they were from Ohio, and the mother and her 3-year-old son. And Evan, I think Elora was, I can't remember, it seemed like she was like 8 or 9 years old. And when they encountered this bear on a trail, it went after the young boy first, a 3-year-old boy, and grabbed him first, and then the mother ensued and started attacking the bear to get the boy away from her. So typically going after the smallest person first. And time period, you can't always say for sure, but typically it's going to happen in most cases in the spring or the fall. Not always, but we always say April and October. Steve Herrero, who wrote the book Bear Attacks, he said that's not always the case, but he said generally speaking, it's going to happen in those periods. And it makes sense why. Bears are coming out of hibernation basically, and they're very hungry too, so they're trying to eat as much food as they possibly can. And these bears, some of them are very emaciated. They went into sleep or into their long periods of sleep in poor condition if they didn't have much food during the fall. So they're very depleted. They're very emaciated. So they come out and they're doing their best job they can to try to get enough food to be able to survive too. In the fall, it makes sense. They're trying to get as much food as they can before they go down for the winter, but not always. Evan Paula was in the summertime, so it doesn't always happen that way. Let's see, Elora Petrosek, hers was around Easter, I think. So there is some variation in that. Daryl, you want me to go through the scenario right now with the, what are we in the time right now? We're about an hour and 5 minutes. Do you want me to go through the scenario of bear encounters and tell people what I would do in a certain situation?
We'll get to that in just a second, because I think we could wrap up some of these questions here. And I'll answer Dawn's question, because she talks about living in bear country, and typically they move through her yard, but she says bears have been known to enter houses. Why is that? Are they ill? Are they old? Do you want to answer that quick? And then all the other questions that I saw so far pretty much revolve around how do you react in whatever situation. And I've got a slide or two I can show you as far as depending on the defensive or offensive. But if Kim, if you want to answer Dawn, like why would a bear, what would spur a bear to enter someone's house?
Okay. Well, you know what? It's kind of we we really what we do. We really train bears to do certain things as well. Let's say, for example, let's use a tent. We can use a let's use a building as well too. Let's say, for example, a bear is very hungry. It's stressed out. It's needing food the worst way, and it goes to an area at nighttime and it smells something good coming out of a building too. The door is open, and it may investigate going inside to be able to investigate good smells or whatever. Same thing in a tent. A tent's a good example. A lot of times people will leave their tent at a campsite, go fishing, go hiking, do whatever too. They may leave food and stuff inside of it. The bear goes up and the tent is open, and it may investigate some good smells inside that tent. It walks in there. It gets rewarded for tolerating that situation where there's human scent involved. It goes in and gets rewarded for that and gets the food. Pretty soon it leaves that, and all of a sudden, I'm sure if you're thinking like a bear, they said, hey, that tent, I got food. So they see another tent, so they may make an assumption that there's just as much food or more food in that next tent as what they had just found in the first one too. So I think that's a training process they learn. I'll tell you a situation where we had a bear go into a home in North Carolina, and we kind of had an unwritten policy. I did in the Smokies that any bear that went into a tent, went into a house or building, or was extremely aggressive, and I understand that's a very subjective statement, we would probably recommend to put that bear down. And so we had a bear that was up at Cleveland's Dome parking area that went into a car. And it was a vehicle that someone had left the back window halfway down. They left a lot of food in the seat there. And so this bear went in there, was reached in trying to get the food, and actually broke the window out, got inside of it and destroyed the car, and actually got the food. Well, we sent someone up there and they captured the bear. And the guy that worked with me, he said, "Are you gonna recommend putting it down?" I said, "I'm not going to." He said, "But I thought you said that any bear." I said, "I know what I said, but I said that's not fair." I said, "That's entrapment if you ask me." So I kind of went on the side of the bear and elected not to go forward and euthanize that bear. We moved the bear up to Johnson County, Tennessee, pretty close to the Virginia border. About 3 weeks later, the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission staff member called me and said, "Hey, we have one of your bears here, and you've told us that if any of your bears cause a problem, if you relocate them, that you'll come and get them." And I said, "What'd he do?" He said he said it was in the summertime. This gentleman was in his house watching TV. Said the bear walked up on the porch. He had a screen door. He pulled the screen door open. He walked into the house, walked in between the TV and the gentleman, who just froze when the bear walked through the living room. It went into the kitchen, and actually went in and pulled the door open and started getting food out of the refrigerator. And I paused for a second and I said, "Is that a problem?" And he kind of said, "Yeah, you better believe it's a problem." And so he said, "You said," I said, I understand that. We will." So I went over and actually picked that bear up and had to bring it back and actually put that animal down too. But so I didn't really do that because I felt like that bear was kind of tricked to really go in that car, and I wanted to give it every benefit of the doubt. Thank heavens, nothing happened in that gentleman's house where that bear went after him. He could have, the bear could have attacked him in his home if it gotten some food and the gentleman was trying to get it out. So it didn't, nothing bad happened other than we had to put the animal down. But that's a case where I elected not to go forward with what we typically did with bears that went into houses. I think a lot of times some bears that are starving to death, typically there's a progressive behavioral change from a wild bear over to a food conditioned bear. And it may start first at nighttime in a low risk area like a picnic area. Under darkness, there's more security in darkness. It's kind of like thieves and things. Not this day and time, but thieves will actually break into people's house when no one's there, or when they can't be seen, like at nighttime. Bears are very, very similar too. And once they get rewarded for tolerating human scent, then they become day active, and then they will actually mimic the same behavior of humans there too. They'll come in the morning when they're cooking breakfast, raid a few tables, go up and sleep until lunchtime, do the same thing at lunch, and go back in the afternoon for a rest, come back at dinner, and actually they'll raise some tables too. So they will mimic exactly what humans do in a certain developed area. So, but in the case with these bears, I think they typically will not just go in there, walk out of the woods one day and say, "Hey, I'm going to go into a house, tear into a house and get some food." I think it takes a period, a training process before they feel bold enough to be able to go into that structure. Unless, let me give you an example, unless they're starving to death. I had one bear in Chimney's picnic area. We had no history of her. She came in and was running around slapping garbage cans and chasing people, raiding tables. I mean, she was just crazy. And so we caught her, no ear tags or anything like that, no tattoos. And most of her teeth, for some reason, had either broken off or were missing entirely. She was in extreme pain, and she was just doing the best job she could trying to find food. So she was in pain, she was starving to death, and she was doing the best she could to try to find food. And so in the cases where they're starving to death, the sky's the limit what they might do to try to get food from people, or to maybe even go into a situation where they look at people as a potential source of food. So there, I just want to cover that predatory part before we
I've got
got
a
too
couple
far.
of slides. Let me go to them because a lot of people want to know how to react in the different situations. And so let me go through this. I already talked about defensive and offensive, where what the bear's intention usually is. And so the last thing that, well, let me go through this. There's certain reactions from a bear in a defensive mode. From the bear's going to be popping his jaws or huffing or moaning. Kim already talked about that. Sometimes they'll even yawn. It's kind of interesting because a lot of people will see a bear yawn and they think that, oh, the bear's tired. That's actually a sign that the bear is a little upset. Sometimes they'll salivate. Now, if you're sitting there and you see a bear salivating, almost everyone immediately says, "Oh my God, he's hungry. He's going to eat me." That is actually a sign that they're really distressed, really nervous. Because what they do is they usually lose facial expressions. They lose control of their face, and so they'll yawn, they'll salivate. That's just a way of letting you know that they're really nervous at that time. Sometimes they will try to give you warnings and say, "All right, you're not listening to me. I'm popping my jaws. I'm huffing." Then they're going to tell you to back up. And so one of the ways that they can tell you to back up is they'll do a bluff charge. Now, a bluff charge is not where they run at you for 50 yards and then stop. That's a full-blown charge. A bluff charge is usually just one or two steps in your direction really quick, and it causes you to back up. And they're just telling you, "Get out of my space." And Kim had mentioned this before. Sometimes they'll swat the ground real aggressively. They're just telling you how distraught they are with you being close to them, and they want you to back up. Those are all defensive behaviors. Offensive behaviors, like Kim said, pretty much they're telling you he's hungry. He's looking for a food reward of some type. And so they'll follow you around. They won't let you out of their sight. They're constant pursuit. The other thing is their head will stay low or swaying back and forth. They're not going to be very vocal. And so these are all signs of offensive behaviors. They'll never let you out of their sight because they're trying to eye you up to determine whether or not they're going to get a food reward. Now, I do have a whole bunch of videos. I won't show them now because we're running long, but I could always email you a link if you're interested. I'll include a link when I send the recording out to all these different videos of all these different behaviors. But this is the slide I wanted to get to, Kim, because a lot of people want to know how to react in case of an encounter. And so this is your chance to communicate with that bear. So let's talk about a defensive situation, and then, Kim, you could go into different scenarios. But for the most part, you don't want to pose as a threat. The bear's nervous that you're close to them. And so you could surprise it at close range, or it could be a female with cubs. They're nervous, so you don't want to pose a threat to them in some situations. You need to get out of that area. So you slowly back away. You yield the right of the way. If the bear wants to go somewhere, you let the bear dictate where he wants to go. You just get out of their way. The other thing, if the bear starts coming at you, you stop the bear. You yell, you shout at it, but not aggressively. Whoa, bear! Whoa, you're getting too close. I'm getting away. I'm sorry. I'm in your space. So you want to like stop the bear's advance, but you don't want to be too overly aggressive because the bear's already nervous. And then if there's contact, this is the thing that we debate all the time. If you're getting attacked by a bear and it's a constant attack, by all means fight back. But sometimes in that defensive situation, the bear is just scared. You surprised it at close range, and they just want to eliminate that threat. So this is one of those things where knowing what kind of situation you're in dictates what kind of reaction you're going to have. Now, that's defensive. I will go to the next slides. In an offensive situation, remember that bear is going to be behaving differently. He's not going to be popping his jaws. He's going to be coming in quiet, looking for some food. You don't want to pose as a meal. This is where you turn the tables. This is where you have to begin to act aggressive. If they're coming at you thinking they're going to get a food reward, this is your chance to say, I'm not food. I don't have food. You're not getting food from me. And so if they come at you, this is where you shout, you get really aggressive. You got to scare that bear away. Let him know that you're in charge and that he's not going to get something from you. And obviously, if there's contact, you fight back with all your might. So, Kim, I'll let you if you want to talk about defensive situations first, we could go back to that. If you want to do a couple of scenarios.
Yeah, we'll go back to defensive, and what I'll do, I'll take what Daryl's got, and I'll expand a little bit on a real life situation too. Let's say, for example, you're in the backcountry and you're hiking down the trail, enjoying nature too. And you walk around a curve, and all of a sudden you surprise a bear. And right off the bat, once he sees you, you see him too. You're both surprised. Then he starts jumping at you, blowing, popping his jaws too, and basically, like we talked before, it's a defensive behavior. And he's telling you that you're too close. He's afraid you're going to get his berries. He's going to get his deer carcass. You're going to get in his space too. So if he pops his jaws, it's a defensive behavior. He's saying, I need you to back away. So you don't turn and run. Just slowly back up and say, okay, bear. Very submissive type of language. Sorry, bear. I'm moving back to slowly move away. Don't be a threat to the animal, and move back and change your direction and go a different way. And typically that's what's going to happen. Most of the time, too, that these animals are not going to come after you once they have that defensive type of behavior. They just want to make sure you're not a threat anymore. So you surprise a bear, it bluff charges, it swats the ground, it pops its jaws, it blows, it moans. It's telling you you're too close, you need to back up, and you need to try to back up the best way you can. Don't get aggressive. Don't yell, scream, and pick up a big stick and take off running after it, too. Be very submissive and increase that distance between you and the animal. Okay, let's take another step. Let's say, for example, you walk around and this bear, does this here, and you're backing away. and however this animal starts walking toward you. So you're walking down the trail, and the animal's following you down the trail, and you're saying, "Okay, bear, I'm moving away too," but he continues to come in your direction. So what's the bear thinking? I'm not really for sure. Sometimes they'll stand up on their back legs. I think they're evaluating you. They may have got some food from someone else, and so they may be trying to get food from you the same way. Maybe the person before you threw their food on the ground just by a bear starting to approach them. So we've trained that animal to learn to approach us, and then some people will throw their food down. So that's what he's trying to do. So let's say, for example, that bear's coming towards us. Say, "Okay, bear, I'm sorry." And so you walk on down the trail, you're slowly, and he's still closing the distance. He's getting closer and closer. So you're going to try to give him every benefit of the doubt. Let's say you might move off trail, and as Daryl said before, give the bear the right of way of where it wants to go. If it's going down a trail, going down a ridge, going down a stream or something, to move out and give it a good opening to be able to pass by you if it will. So if it goes on by you, then great. That's what we've accomplished too. Some bears have got in their mind they want to go this direction, and you just happen to be in the way. So get out of their way and let those animals go by. But let's say, for example, he didn't go by. Let's say you turn off the trail. The bear turns off the trail too and starts to come closer to you that way. So that's where he starts getting more serious. It's going into maybe something that's more offensive than it is defensive. So at this point, what I tell people to do, you then have to reestablish your dominance over that animal. And you can do it by 2 or 3 different ways. You can be very authoritative. "Hey, bear, get back, bear." Wave your arms up like it's right here. "Hey, bear, it's okay to pick up rocks. Throw rocks at it. Do whatever you got to do to be able to make sure that you're bigger and meaner than that animal that's approaching you." Now, if you're in a group of people, there's power in numbers. So get everybody close together. Get your kids or grandkids or something, your children, in the back or in the middle to be able to protect them. But there's power in numbers. You can get on top of a rock. You can get on top of a log. Anytime that would make you taller, bigger, appear to be bigger, the better too. You have to reestablish your dominance over that animal. Okay, let's say, for example, you've done all those things and he's not backing off. He's still continuing to get closer and closer and closer. If you have pepper spray at that time, if it's a problem bear, and we talked about it earlier, I think, Betsy, 5 feet is, they'll come within 5 feet. They'll come even closer than 5 feet. The reason I say make sure you don't deploy the pepper spray too quick, because it'll create a fog and stuff too. If you're too far away, it may drift off and not create that barrier that you're trying to achieve between that animal, that approaching animal, and yourself too. So spraying it down below the animal a little ways, and of course it's going to start to rise, will create a barrier that hopefully will work, and this animal will move away. So let's say, for example, you don't have pepper spray. You've thrown rocks. You've been very authoritative. You've got everybody together. You're on top of a log or something. You look big, and he will not back off. So at what point should you throw your food to it? Steve Herrero and I had a kind of a disagreement about that. He thought that if you felt like the bear was after your food, that you should throw your food to it. And I said, Steve, 99.9% of the bears that approach people are after our food. If we advise people to throw their food to it, we're going to be food conditioning half of the bears inside the park. So we actually agreed on the statement that if a bear approaches you and you think it's after your food, and it makes contact with you. Now, what does that mean? Well, if it gets closer, you're yelling, you're screaming, it comes up and it slaps your foot, slaps your leg, or it grabs your leg too. We tell people to separate yourself from your food. So what does that mean? You can toss your backpack over, or your food sack, whatever you got, throw it over the side, and typically that bear will go over and get the food, and then you can slowly back away if it's after your food. Give me one little key. Sometimes if when you throw rocks at it, try to figure out if this bear is after my food or this bear after me. If he's after your food, you throw a rock at him and you miss him, sometimes he may run over there and smell that rock. So what that would tell you is that hey, he thinks I'm throwing food to him because someone else has done that before me. So that'll kind of give you an idea that he's after your food. So you still be very, very bold. The animal comes up to and don't give up your food too quickly. But if he makes contact with you, obviously common sense is going to tell you you're going to separate yourself from your food, and hopefully he'll go after your food. You're able to move away too. But in the last situation too, let's say for example this bear you separate yourself from your food. This happened in the case of Glenda Bradley. She had a backpack or a little day pack. It had, I think, a candy bar that had been eaten and maybe another candy bar that was uneaten. And as she was moving away from the bear, she laid the backpack down, or it was found along the trail, and the bear apparently did not tear anything up in the backpack. So the bear had no interest in her food. The bear can't continue to come after her. So in the case where you separate yourself from your food, you put your food on the ground, the bear may come over and smell it like it did with a couple up at Old Sugarlands Trail. It smell that, but then it can continue to come after them. Then you're probably in the ultimate situation where you're going to have to really get aggressive and to be able to fight that bear off of you. Now, if that bear continues to come with you and you have the people, everybody stay together. Don't separate. One person does not need to take off running. We know that's a no-no. But stay there together and fight together too. If he comes up and someone falls down, he jumps on somebody, we tell people to fight back anything possible. The eyes and the nose are very sensitive. If you've got anything basically to be able to, as Daryl said, protect your neck and things like that, go in the fetal position too. But someone should try to fight that animal and get that bear off of the person that's on the ground as well. And then we're talking about black bears now. We're not talking about brown bears or grizzlies. And that's where some people get confused. If it's a brown bear or a grizzly bear, we tell people to play dead. But in the case of black bears, if you're a prey species and that bear has got you as a potential source of food, playing dead is not the right thing to do. That happened in a case in New Mexico where a bear attacked a young 16-year-old girl. And basically, we're assuming she played dead because she laid there for a period of time. This bear started to feed on her and ate 6 pounds of flesh off of her hip and leg. Then she started yelling and screaming, and people came in and dealt with the bear and actually killed it as well too. So, but if that bear jumps on somebody, you fight back with anything possible that you can to be able to get the animal off of that too. You have to be bigger and you have to be meaner than that animal to be able to reestablish your dominance on that. Now, the chances of this happen is extremely rare. There's probably a better chance that a tree will fall in the woods and hit and kill you than what I've just described to you. But it's very important to know what the bear's telling you. It's very important to know what you should do and what you shouldn't do in that situation. And if you do those things and communicate to that bear, who you are too, I think you're going to have a very, very good outcome.
We're going on about an hour and a half here. What I want to do is just make sure, does anyone have any questions or scenarios that you would like for us to discuss? By all means, let us know if you have any other questions, and if there's a situation you found yourself in, or a situation you're even worried about. Like if you go hiking with your dog or any type of situation and you want to know what you should do in case you encounter a bear, let us know. And so this is, I don't have any more slides to show. So from this point forward, if we want to make sure we get all of your questions answered with tonight's presentation. I don't see anybody typing. Okay, multiple attendees are typing. And one thing that I'll assure you, what I was going to do is I was going to show you some video clips of different bear behaviors. But instead of doing that, you won't see it too well with the video here. I'm going to include those video clips. I'll send a link to my Dropbox so you can actually go in there and look at different bear behaviors. And we've got everything from jaw popping to huffing to bluff charges. And based on what you learned today between the defensive and the offensive, when they're really vocal and really animated, that's almost immediately going to tell you that bear is it's in a defensive mode. He doesn't want you around him, or he wants you to get away from him. And so when they become very vocal, that's what they're trying to tell you is back up, get away, I'm nervous. Now, when they're silent and coming in, that's the offensive. And we actually do have a couple of video clips of predatory behavior. And you'll watch those video clips are pretty shaky because there's a really tense situation. But you can see where the bear's coming in with its head low to the ground, just trying to feel the person out. And fortunately, both those video clips, it worked out for the better. But it's really interesting because when you see it enough time, Kim and I have had the luxury of seeing lots and lots of bears, and they're extremely, in most situations, they're predictable. They could always be unpredictable, but when you see these behaviors, the jaw popping and huffing, it's like they're trying to talk to you all the time. And so these videos will be good, and I'll send those out in the email with the recording.
Daryl, I might mention one thing too. We didn't go through all the scenarios, but common sense should kick in here. And let's say in a developed area or in a residential area too, a bear approaches, comes in your yard, things like that too. The bear's coming in, and if you're barbecuing or things like that, just trying to secure that food the best way you can. If you're in a campground or something, try to get your food off of the table before the bear comes in. He knows where your food is. Try to secure that in your camper or in your vehicle as quick as you possibly can. So common sense really is a big part of responding to bears. And so just trying to keep our food from these animals is really the main part we need to try to deal with. Let me say this right here. If you're too late, let's say, for example, a bear gets on your table and gets your food and you can't get to it in time, I wouldn't recommend going up and being very bold trying to take the food, because he has claimed your food. It's his food. It's not yours anymore. If you try to take it from him, then there could be some consequences associated with that. So once they're able to acquire your food, I'd be very, very cautious trying to take your food back away from them.
Unfortunately, I don't know the answer. She said, do you know anything about the woman and dog that were attacked near Grayson Highlands last year? I'm not familiar with that. I don't know where Grayson Highlands is.
I don't think so. There was a gentleman in Kentucky that had a dog that a bear. He was attacked by a bear. His dog came in and actually was able to battle with the bear, and actually the guy was able to get away from it too. But that's the only one I can remember having to deal with
okay,
a guy with
clarified.
or a person with a dog.
Apparently, it's up on the AT in Mount Rogers, Virginia. Unfortunately, I haven't heard about it. I don't think Kim has heard about it either. But there's a really good question here from Don. And Kim, you could address it if you want. Don says, what effect do the weird, short, or variable winters have on hibernating bears? Do they wake up during warm spells? Will they come out of hibernation early if winters are mild?
They will. Actually, warm periods they can become active too. Typically, they will still keep their fecal plug. They should not go out. They probably wouldn't go out and eat and continue like they were waking up forever too. But warm periods, we've had bears move around as well too. I mentioned earlier, maybe before we started, bears that are hibernation, if they're disturbed by dogs or if a lot of rain like we've had this year in our area, the den may be flooded. They may move those cubs to a new place or may choose another den. And bears typically do not use the same den that they used the previous years. Well, they usually will pick a new den too. So,
I can answer Don's question.
Does that answer your question?
What I'm going to do, I'll send you a separate email because I do a webinar just on black bear hibernation, and it goes into the processes and what the bear goes through. And one thing I'm always preaching, because I hear people say it all the time where, oh, bears in Tennessee or bears in the South, they don't hibernate. And I try to correct them. A lot of times biologists get into these geeky biological terms about, is it true hibernation? Is it torpor? There's different terminology. But for the general public, I want the general public to understand black bears, even in Tennessee, they do hibernate. Now, they might not be sleeping for 4 months straight. They'll get up, walk around, stretch their legs. They wake up really easy. And it's mostly due to a function of the way they hibernate. Their body temperature, unlike a true hibernator like a groundhog, their body temperature does not drop much. It only drops about 7 or 8 degrees. And so they're really, really warm when they're hibernating. And so they can wake up quickly. And so we pretty much say bears are just deep sleepers. And so a true hibernator like a groundhog, its body temperature will drop to literally just above freezing. And so they're in a frozen coma. Bears are not like that. So anyway, but for the most part, just understand most bears in the South, they hibernate, they go into a den, they sleep for a long period of time, but they can get up and be active. And that's a lot to do with the temperature outside. If they think it's warm enough, they might get out, go for a walk, get something to eat. But a lot will also depend on their body conditioning. If they're underweight, they tend to wake up more. A bear with a heavy layer of fat will sleep more soundly. Apparently, that's why I have no problem sleeping through the night. But for the most part, a bear that's underweight tends to wake up more, tries to scavenge food as much as they can because hibernation's tough on animals. And Ginny had a question, really, really good. She recounts an instance or instances where she ran into a bear just outside her house that was walking by. She says she was startled and she started waving her hands and yelling at him, and he just calmly walked off. She says, I normally blow an air horn to try to scare them off when they pass through because I have neighbors who feed wildlife and bears. Should I keep scaring them off as they pass through or just let them if they aren't getting into feeders or trash? And Kim, you can tell your opinion after I do mine, but I just don't like bears being really comfortable being around people's houses. So if ever I have a chance, yeah, I'm not going to harass them, but if they're lingering too long in my backyard because they're kind of like just looking for something, then by all means, take a picture, enjoy it, but then give them a negative stimulus. Blow that air horn, bang some pots and pans. Let them know that if they hang around too long, it's not going to be pleasant. So I don't know if you have a different response, Kim, but
No, it's about the same, Daryl. Like I said before, if you don't want a bear on your property, the negative experience has to be higher than the negative experience has to be greater than the positive experience. So no scraps, no food rewards or anything like that. Then something negative, and of course, bears are totally different. Sometimes air horns make no difference; they completely ignore them too. Other times, throwing a rock at it, they'll take off, and hightail it out of there. So it's just totally different between animals. Depends on the degree of conditioning, on how they respond to different kinds of deterrents as well too. I had one wildlife officer tell me, he said, you buy those little cheap packs of firecrackers. He would light one of those and he would throw it out there and it sounded like a machine gun going off. He said they will typically run away from that. So it just depends on the animal, the amount of conditioning it has, of whether
I'm going to
different
add to
things
what
are going to
Kim
run the
said. And
animal off.
Kim remembers this story, and this is one of my experiences. When I was working at the Appalachian Bear Center at the time, it's now the Bear Rescue, we had received some habituated cubs from Virginia, and they were, I forget, they're probably about 7 or 8 months old. They're good size. They're about 30 pounds, but they were very used to being around people. They were fed by people since the day they were born, and we wanted to know whether or not we could instill the fear of humans in them. So it was my job as the manager of the Bear Center to use some aversive conditioning so the bears didn't like being around people. And so the very first thing I did when I would go down to the bear pens to feed them, they would hear me coming or smell me coming, and they would run over to the fence where I was. Now there was blinds there, so they couldn't see me, but they knew I was there, and they would run over because they liked being around people. And that's not a good thing. If you're a wild bear, that will get you killed faster than anything else. And so the first thing I did is I wanted to scare them, and so I used a high pressure water hose. And so whenever they would walk over towards me, I would lift the blind so they would see a human there, and I'd spray them with the hose. And the first time I did this, they went running for the trees, which was great. The problem is the Bear Center is located in Townsend, Tennessee, the deep south. So midsummer, it was 98 degrees. and they would come over and I'd spray them with a hose, and before long they're spinning around dancing in the water. So I had to elevate my game and try to really scare them. So it went from trying to scare them with a water hose to using pepper spray, which was really effective, to using a cattle prod. I would zap them, give them a zap of electricity. We used pyrotechnics. I had to actually go to the store to buy firecrackers. Kim Delosier and one of his friends brought over some dogs to harass these bears. We wanted these bears, every time that they saw a human, that they would run for the trees. And so we did that for months, trying to condition these bears to be afraid of people. And this is how it turned out, and this speaks to the bear's intelligence, is after months and months of conditioning them to be afraid, we were determining, we had to run a test to see if they could be released to the wild. And so what we did is we went in there, Denny Martin, who is the Virginia black bear coordinator for the state of Virginia, the bears were going back to Virginia, and he came down and he asked me how the bears were doing. And I said, well, come watch this. And so me and Denny walked into the bear pens, and I think I had the cattle prod in my hand, or a can of pepper spray. And as soon as they saw me, they shot up to the top of the trees. And he said, man, Daryl, that's amazing. This is exactly the reaction we want. We want these bears afraid of us. And I said, not so fast, Denny. And I said, watch this. And I went outside and I put the can of pepper spray outside the pen, and I walked in, and I didn't have that instrument in my hands that caused them pain or terror. And so as soon as I walked in and I didn't have the thing that was going to scare them, they came down out of the tree and walked over, and one of them actually started licking Denny's boot. And he's like, we could not release a bear that was that conditioned to being around people. Because can you imagine turn that bear loose in the wild and a hiker comes by? And the bear's probably, I shouldn't say harmless, but the bear's not meaning anything bad other than it likes being around people. But can you imagine if bear walked up to hikers and started like grabbing their legs or licking their their hands or anything like that? And so we had to find homes for those bears. They couldn't be returned back to the wild. So they're extremely, extremely intelligent animals.
Yeah, one thing I might say, I remember Dr. Michael Pelton always said that if you equate intelligence with size of brain, primates are number one, bears are number two, and actually pigs are number three. So I thought that was pretty interesting too. Daryl, I might say one thing too. If people have questions later too, would they send those to you?
Put it this way: anyone that's on this
how do
presentation,
you work that?
after we sign off here in a little bit, if you're laying in bed and like, oh, I meant to ask Kim this, don't worry about it. Just send me an email to that Wildlife for You training. That's where we send emails back and forth. Just say, ask Kim about this, or if you have a question, just send it to us, and we will develop that response and get it right back to you. That's, like I said, that's why we do these, is we want to make sure you fully understand the topic, and we're here for you to answer whatever questions you have. So email us anything, anytime, and we'll be sure to answer it for you. Now, Don asked a question.
Jenny, I was going to make sure we answered Jenny's too, but as far as bears traveling through your property, I probably would not want them to do that if you can prevent that. They're going from one food source, maybe your neighbor feeds, and on one side, your neighbor feeds on the other side. So they're going from point A to point B. So anything you can keep them away from your property will minimize the chance that they're going to get something that you may have on your property. And,
now, Kim, if you
then
don't
you've
mind,
got a friend for life.
Don asked one more question about, said we had two sows traveling with several cubs in our area. That was in this past summer. Could this be a mother traveling with her older daughter as well as her younger cubs and some grandkids? Would sows in a group like this be less likely to become protective as safety and numbers were even for them? In fact, even number of bears and even number of people. So anyway, if you want to answer Don's question, I'm going to type a response to someone else.
Yeah, absolutely. It didn't happen a whole lot too, but sometimes females will share their part of their territory with their offspring, their female offspring too. What happens with young males, that sometimes the young males, when they reach sexual maturity, they will basically start competing for females, and then they're basically kicked out. The males are going to kick them out. So they're the ones that travel the farthest distance away from basically where they were, where their home territory was. But females are interesting. They will share their territory with their female offspring. And so, yes, you can have one that actually stays with the mother longer than typically what it is. Typically, they're with them for a year and a half, and then they wean those and actually push those away as well. But no, sometimes you'll have two different age classes with a female. Didn't happen a lot, but yeah, it sure
I'm
can
just
happen.
clicking through the rest. I whenever I give a presentation, this was Kim's presentation here. Whenever I give one, I usually have a lot more slides. But the one thing I do want to remind everyone, Kim has another talk coming up March 7th, 7 p.m. again. But it's going to be talking about black bear management and what state and federal agencies do to keep those bears wild. And so I worked with the state of Tennessee for almost 15 years managing bears. Kim did it a lot longer than me in the national park. And so just some of the different tactics we use to help manage the bear population. So whenever you visit the park or any place else in bear country, there's plenty of bears out there. We're pretty particular about protecting the bears and making sure that there's a healthy population out there for everyone to enjoy.
Daryl, I might say one thing. This is a new webinar as well, and I wanted to do this because I want people to kind of get inside of our head as bear managers and understand why we do what we do. Because sometimes we'll hear that a bear was euthanized. Well, why did they do that? Why did they let it go? Or something they'll say, why did they kill that bear? Because that was dangerous. And so it's kind of a fine line on which way we go sometimes, but we'll hopefully help you understand how we think as a bear manager. At what point do we kind of throw the towel in and say, this bear is too risky for us to allow it to be around people too. So I'm pretty excited about it as well too. It's something that we learned in the park, basically, on how these animals become a problem, and then where could you draw the line where it's kind of the point of no return? There's a point of where these bears basically will move to, that there's nothing we can do, kind of what Daryl talked about earlier with the cubs from the Virginia. There's a point to where basically you can't do anything to really change those animals' behavior. They're so smart, so intelligent, they're going to remember how they got food in the past too. So I'm excited about it too and looking forward to it.
Well, I want to thank everyone for listening and for asking whatever questions or providing whatever scenarios you brought forward. Like I said, anytime you have a question about bears, bear management, bear behavior, or anything like that, this whole Wildlife for You program, we've got a number of professionals. If you ask me a question that I can't answer, I know enough folks that pretty much will be able to answer your question for you. So always email it to us. Many of you have my text. Facebook. If you follow us on Facebook, by all means, do a new post. Let us know. Put it this way, I don't like social media because there's a lot that is bad about it, but it's also a wonderful, wonderful tool for the right reasons. And oftentimes we're teaching people about wildlife, and people are afraid to ask questions. And so if you post a question to us on Facebook, we'll answer it publicly. And by answering you, we're probably answering 100 other people that had the same question. And so by all means, let's communicate through Facebook. It's a wonderful tool, but if you don't do Facebook, by all means, email us and we'll get you that answer. Okay, there's another question. Kim, before you leave, Don asked a question. What makes a bear predatory? Would a big alpha male feel emboldened by his strength?
Well, that's interesting. It's probably an impossible question to answer too. Why bears will actually go to the point where they go predatory too. There's like I said, there's so many things. You don't know what that bear's gone through. You don't know how hungry he is or she is. But obviously, the bigger animals, will feel maybe more comfortable into going after prey that normally they wouldn't. A smaller animal wouldn't as well either. So I'll tell you what, I'll answer it by saying this, that Steve Herrero, Glenda Bradley that was killed in the park, she actually weighed a little bit more than what the bear did. The bear that killed her only weighed about 112, 113 pounds. So it wasn't a great big huge male bear. It was a female with actually a yearling that actually killed her too. And so I asked Steve Herrero, I said, if Glenda had been a guy that was 6'2", weighed 275 pounds, what would have happened? And Steve said, absolutely nothing. That bear would not have gone after someone that big. So that gives you a little inclination about how these bears think. I think the bigger they are, and the more stress they go through. Stress might be from a high bear population. It could be lack of food sources. It could be, basically this bear has had conflict with other bears. It's unbelievable how many different scenarios you could have for all the stars to line up for a bear to finally decide to go after
Now, I
someone
will
as a
tell
prey
you,
species.
the other part of her question was about big alpha males. I will tell you, I did a couple of camera studies on Cherokee National Forest, and boy, oh boy, Kim, you could probably attest. There's some bears that are just they're the ruler of the land in that area because they're big, they're mean, they're nasty, and no one messes with them. And so they're just like
Yeah, yeah, that's true. They actually found out in some of the areas where you had numerous nuisance animals, they were catching some and moving them. They found out if they had a huge alpha male that was basically a very dominant animal, they had less property damage if they left that big alpha male in there because he kept a lot of the smaller, weaker animals away, and they had less damage by tolerating the damage that he did. So yeah, they're very intimidating, and we've had the biggest bear on record in the park, weighs 620 pounds. It was a garbage bear, but still, those bears that are very big,
all right, what I'm going
they
to
can be
do,
very
I'm going to thank you
intimidating.
one last time. I'm going to stop the recording and just let you know that you guys were awesome, and I hope you join us in a couple of weeks when Kim does another webinar. But look at our Facebook page or our website. We've got lots of different webinars from, I just taught animal tracks. We got a whole bunch of cool webinars coming up. But if you like bears, Kim's got another one coming up. I will send everyone the recording. I'm also going to send you a link to all the videos, and I'll also include a couple of links to the hibernation webinar as well as the language of bears, because I think that'll explain a lot of the bear behavior we talked about today. So you guys were awesome, and thank you so very much, and hopefully we'll see you at a future webinar.
Yeah, thank you guys. I appreciate it very much. So, if you got any questions,
Thanks,
just
Kim.
shoot
I
them our
appreciate
direction.
everything you did.